Teachers told the black boy to play the violin as a joke, but they regretted it when he started playing. A teacher dared a quiet black boy to play his violin, to embarrass him. The class laughed. They thought it'd be a joke. But when he played the first note, everything stopped. No one laughed. No one moved. He turned humiliation into history in under 4 minutes, making an entire school face their silence. This wasn't just music. This was payback without saying a word. And what happened after the performance? That's the part no one talks about until now. It started with a silence. Not the kind that follows something shocking, but the kind that comes right before people decide it's safe to laugh. "Hey, Brooks," Mr. Ben said from the front of the class, his voice casual, his tone dipped in something too slick to be called innocent. "You've been carrying that violin around all year. Why don't you show us what it can do?" The words landed lightly, like a feather, then cut like glass. A few chuckles slipped out, then more. One kid dragged a bow across the air, screeching like a dying cat. Another whispered, "He probably only knows Baby Shark." Miss Fulton, perched beside the whiteboard with a stack of ungraded quizzes, didn't hide her grin. In the back, William Brooks blinked once. He didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He didn't move the case sitting between his knees, old, worn at the corners, patched with peeling tape like a wound that refused to close. But he'd heard it all, not just today, but every day since he brought that violin through the school gates. They didn't mock it outright, not at first. They just looked. The kind of look that says, "That doesn't belong here. That you don't belong here." He'd gotten used to that look. But this moment, right here, it wasn't just a look anymore. It was a challenge dressed as a joke. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to know, was that the violin wasn't for show. William didn't play for attention. He played because it was the only time he didn't feel like he was shrinking. He played in the small apartment above the corner store, where the lights flickered and the windows rattled every time the 5:18 bus passed. He played while his mom rubbed her feet after a double shift, and his sister tried to sleep through the neighbors yelling. When he had no words to explain why he felt like a ghost walking through his own life, he played. So when Mr. Ben turned him into a punchline, William didn't get angry. He didn't shrink. He didn't explain himself. He lifted his eyes, not to Mr. Ben or the students grinning predictably with popcorn, but past them. "I'll do it," he said. 3 words, steady, final, like closing a door. And just like that, the room shifted. By the end of the day, his name was on the sign-up sheet for the school's talent show. 17th spot, scribbled in lowercase, no hearts, no flair. Some kids laughed again, said he'd back out, said he'd embarrass himself, said he'd cry when he messed up. William heard it all. He folded their words quietly and tucked them somewhere deep. Not for revenge, for fuel. Because here's the truth. William Brooks had spent his whole life being told, directly or otherwise, that he was invisible. That, unless he raised his voice or played their game, he would be overlooked. But he didn't want to be loud. He wanted to be heard. Friday arrived. The gym buzzed with the sound of cheap folding chairs and restless energy. Phones were charged, ready to record the subsequent viral embarrassment. No one came expecting magic. They came expecting failure. When William Brooks was called, there wasn't a ripple of applause, just a soft wave of expectation that he'd trip on the way up. He didn't. He stepped into the spotlight like it wasn't new, like he'd been walking toward it all his life. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He raised the violin, placed it under his chin, closed his eyes, and breathed. The first note wasn't loud. It wasn't polished. It was raw, fragile, like a thread pulled tight across silence. The room leaned in. Then the second note came, deeper, darker, a sound that curled around your ribs and pressed gently. The gym disappeared. The voices fell away. All that remained was a boy and a sound that refused to apologize for its beauty. He played like the violin was telling his story, one that the world had never cared to ask. The notes built, climbed, broke, and mended. Near the middle, it felt less like a performance and more like a reckoning, something ancient, personal, and true. And when it ended, when the final note stretched into silence, and his bow stilled, and his shoulders settled like he'd finally exhaled, there was nothing. Then everything. One clap. Then two. Then all. Not a roar. Not a cheer. Something slower. Honest. Reverent. William Brooks dismantled the entire joke in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and made them remember how it feels to be listened to. They thought he was just a quiet kid with a violin, until they learned what he'd been preparing for. The door to apartment 3B creaked open just past 6 o'clock p.m., and William stepped inside like he always did, quietly, head down, violin case in hand. But something was different that evening. The light above the stove flickered like it knew. The air felt heavier, charged, like something was waiting. He didn't take off his shoes, didn't reach for a snack. Instead, he moved straight to the corner of the living room, where the carpet had been flattened by months of practice. He set the violin down gently, like laying a heartbeat to rest, and unlatched the case with care that felt almost ritualistic. He didn't speak, but he was thinking louder than ever. All week they had laughed, at school, in the halls, outside the gym. They joked about how he'd crack under pressure and make a fool of himself. He never responded, not with his mouth. But his hands were doing the talking now, the talking that bruised your palms from the inside out. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a sheet of folded paper. Not sheet music, not some printed song from the internet. Just a page covered in his handwriting, tight, crooked lines of notes and markings, scribbled in pencil and smudged from use. It wasn't a composition. It was a confession, a musical map of everything he couldn't say aloud. This wasn't practice. This was memory. This was preparation. They didn't know that William had been writing this piece for months, in fragments, in silence. After arguments in the apartment next door, after the power went out, he played in the dark. After his mom came home with swollen ankles and no words left for comfort. After the day, his sister was suspended for talking back to a teacher who had said she was too aggressive to ask a question. William had collected those moments, note by note, until they became music. And now it was almost ready. As he lifted the bow, his little sister peeked in from the hallway, holding her tablet like a shield. "You still working on it?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. "Almost done," he said. "Are you sure you want to play it for them?" He paused, not because he doubted himself, but because he remembered everything that made this piece necessary. "They don't get to decide what I'm afraid of," he said. The first note echoed through the apartment. It was not sweet, not beautiful, raw, like a throat clearing through grief. His sister sat down on the floor, hugging her knees. She didn't understand the theory, but she understood the sound. It wasn't long before their mother opened the door, her scrubs stained, the scent of bleach clinging to her like a second skin. She didn't say a word, just leaned in the doorway and listened. The rule was unspoken. No interruptions when William played this. He didn't stop when the D-string buzzed. He didn't flinch when the bow slipped. He just kept going, eyes closed, fingertips blistered. The music twisted and rose like smoke from something burning inside him. It didn't sound like anything they'd taught him in school. It wasn't Bach. It wasn't jazz. It wasn't clean. It was honest. And honesty has a sound. He played until his arms went numb. His breath caught short, and the final note fell away, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. His mother crossed the room and sat beside him. She didn't clap. She just took his hand and wrapped it in a cold towel. "You still got time to change your mind?" she said. "I don't want to." She nodded. "Good. Because they don't see you yet." He looked down at his violin, its neck chipped from years of being dropped, rescued, and carried across sidewalks that never felt steady. "They will," he said. Later that night, while the city hummed its tired lullaby outside the window, William sat at the edge of his bed, not nervous, but still, a kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks open, not from pressure, but from purpose. He wasn't going to school on Friday to impress them. He was going to show them everything they chose not to see. It wasn't the lights that made the gym feel unnatural. It was the silence before his name was called. You could feel it before you heard it. That breath people take before something happens, when no one's sure what they're bracing for, but everyone leans forward anyway. Next up, William Brooks. The voice crackled over the microphone, unsure, like the speaker expected to be corrected. There were no cheers, no polite claps, just the creak of folding chairs and the electric rustle of anticipation. A few phones were already up, recording and waiting. William stepped into the spotlight the way fog rolls over a field. Slow, steady, undeniable. His shoes barely made a sound on the hardwood. His hands held the violin like it might float away if he didn't carefully ground it. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't need to. They were already looking at him, some with pity, others with doubt, a few with thinly veiled cruelty disguised as curiosity. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He didn't ask them to listen. He raised the violin to his shoulder as a soldier raised his flag. And he played. The first note didn't explode. It whispered. A single, trembling breath across the strings. It hung there, wavering like smoke in a room that had never known fire. It wasn't perfect. It was human. That was its power. The second note came darker, full-bodied. It slid in low and pressed itself into the silence. People began shifting in their seats, not out of boredom, but out of something else. Something they didn't have a name for yet. Confusion, maybe, or the beginning of awe. This wasn't a song they'd heard before. It didn't follow the rules. It had no hook, no beat to nod along to. It wasn't trying to entertain. It was telling the truth, which made it all the more dangerous. William's eyes were closed, but his face was alive. Every muscle spoke. His shoulders dipped, then surged. His left hand climbed the fingerboard like it was chasing something, and the bow, frayed at the tip, shaky in places, was wielded like a blade. And then it happened. A shift. A pivot in the melody so sudden it felt like the room tilted with it. The softness cracked. The notes grew jagged, louder, electric. His sound didn't ask permission. It broke down the door. There was agony in it, but also pride, fury, but with grace. Every measure hit like a memory being exercised. People stopped breathing. A phone dropped and clattered on the gym floor. No one moved to pick it up. The crescendo built until it was unbearable, like trying to swallow grief while it screams to be named. Then came the stillness. William held one long, aching note until it quivered on the edge of vanishing. It stretched time. It stitched silence into something sacred. And finally, it ended. No flourish, no bow. The violin slowly lowered, and William stood in the center of that old gym like someone who had just survived a storm. Only he had the language. At first, there was nothing. No applause, no whispers, just stunned, breathless, quiet. The kind that doesn't come from shock, but from realization, from recognition. Like the room had just seen something they weren't prepared to carry. Then, a single clap. It echoed, sharp and awkward. Then another. And then came the wave. People stood. It's not like they were cheering for a talent show act. They were bearing witness. Something inside them had shifted, even if they couldn't name it, even if they wouldn't admit it. William didn't smile. He didn't need to. The silence had done the work. As he stepped off stage, Mr. Ben was waiting at the edge, mouth half open, words caught between apology and astonishment. William walked past him without a glance. Because when the music is honest, it doesn't explain itself. And when it's honest enough, it leaves no room for laughter. Only silence. The kind that listens and remembers. And no one, not Mr. Ben, not the kids with their phones half raised, not even the ones who secretly hoped he'd be great to believe someone could be, was ready for what that violin had been waiting to say. The day they stopped looking down on him. They used to pass by him like a shadow. Not out of cruelty, out of certainty. The kind of certainty people feel when they believe they've already read your story just by glancing at your cover. Quiet black boy. Old violin case. Doesn't speak unless spoken to. Must not have much to say. But on Monday morning, after the show, something had shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, but undeniably. William walked through the school's front doors the same way he always did. Measured steps, hoodie drawn, violin case against his hip like a memory that never left him. But now the air around him felt like it had weight, like silence itself was watching. They didn't know how to look at him anymore. Not the kids who had once laughed behind their hands. Not the teachers who had offered plastic smiles, but never real questions. Their gazes lingered too long, or not at all. He wasn't invisible. He was unclassified now, because the boy they had mocked had made them listen, and they didn't know how to live with what they heard. Mr. Ben stood near the front office, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. He looked up when William passed, then looked down too fast, like guilt had reflexes. He cleared his throat. "Hey, that was incredible Friday," he said, voice rough like a man trying to patch something already torn. William didn't pause, didn't nod, didn't look back, because sometimes forgiveness isn't something you give, it's something you outgrow. In the second period, Miss Fulton called his name differently, unlike a roll call, like she'd never really said it before. She didn't ask him to solve an equation. She asked him to stay after class. And when the room emptied, she stood before him like a child holding broken glass. "I misjudged you," she said. "I thought I saw you, but I didn't look." William said nothing. Because what do you say when someone admits they just realized you're real? He turned to leave, then paused. "You don't owe me your regret," he said softly. "Just don't do it to the next one." That was all. He didn't want pity. He wanted change. By lunch, The cafeteria buzzed with a strange hush. The table where he used to sit alone wasn't empty, but no one filled his seat either. It was like a line had been drawn around him, not of exclusion, but of reverence. The same kids who once rolled their eyes when he tuned his violin now looked away first. Not out of shame, out of awareness. And that was new. One boy, maybe 12, walked up and placed a carton of chocolate milk beside him. He didn't say a word, didn't ask for a lesson, didn't ask for a selfie. He just sat there, quiet, next to someone who had made an entire room stop breathing and chose to be near it. That was the moment William understood. Not everyone clapped because they understood. Not everyone changed because they were wrong. But some did. And sometimes that's enough. Enough to shift the air in a hallway. Enough to make a teacher second-guess her tone. Enough to make one boy believe he doesn't have to hide the thing that makes him different. William didn't want to be a hero. He wanted to be heard. And now that he was, the silence that followed him didn't feel like a shadow anymore. It felt like space being made. Finally. The clapping had stopped days ago. The folding chairs were stacked. The stage was cleared. The phone recordings had already been uploaded, commented on, and scrolled past. On the surface, everything had returned to normal. But normal didn't feel the same anymore. For the first time in his teaching career, Mr. Ben dreaded stepping into room 208, not because of lesson plans or behavior reports, but because of a name: William Brooks. It wasn't guilt that haunted him. It was the slow, crushing realization that he had become everything he once swore he never would be. A man who underestimated a child, a man who used humor as a shield for fear, a man who helped a roomful of students laugh at what they didn't understand and called it just a moment. But William's performance had shattered that moment into 1,000 jagged pieces. Mr. Ben hadn't expected to be moved, certainly not by a kid he'd never really looked at. But when that boy played, something broke. Not just in the audience, but inside himself. A quiet fracture. And now, days later, it hadn't healed. He watched William walk into class with that same quiet presence, same worn violin case slung over his shoulder. But nothing about the boy felt small anymore. He took up space now, not by force, but by truth. And truth, once heard, cannot be unheard. Mr. Ben opened his mouth, tried to form the beginning of an apology, but no words came. How do you apologize for something you didn't even know you were guilty of until it was too late? William didn't need him to say anything. That, somehow, made it worse. Across the classroom, students who had once whispered about William behind bent notebooks now watched him differently, not with fear, not with reverence, but with a pause, with thought. A few had even deleted their video clips. It wasn't out of shame. It was something quieter, something that sat heavy on their ribs. In the lunchroom, the jokes had stopped. William didn't become popular. That's not how truth works. He became respected. And respect is built in silence, not noise. But perhaps the most jarring shift was the absence of something: permission. They no longer had permission to laugh at quiet kids, to mock softness, to reduce the difference in spectacle, because they had seen what it could become when unboxed. One afternoon, Mr. Ben caught a group of boys teasing a 6th grader who had brought a flute to school. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He walked over, pointed to the instrument and said, "You might want to remember the name on that case." They went silent. He didn't mention William. He didn't have to. Because sometimes The most significant legacy a moment can leave behind isn't applause. It's a new standard. William had not set out to teach a lesson. He had played the truth as it lived inside him. But that was the lesson. That's what left the deepest bruise. Later that week, as the sun bled across the pavement outside, Mr. Ben found himself at the threshold of the music room. The door was open. Inside, William was alone, tuning his violin. No audience, no stage, just him and the instrument that had rewritten how they all saw the world. Mr. Ben cleared his throat. William didn't look up, but he spoke. "You're not the first," he said. "You're just the one who was still watching when I decided to stop being small." It wasn't cruel. It was clean, honest. Mr. Ben nodded slowly, the kind of nod people give when they know they've been forgiven, but not excused. And then he left. Because some moments aren't for reclaiming. Some are just meant to be remembered. Like the sound of a bow across strings in a room that had forgotten how to listen. A strange silence settles when you know you've done something wrong, but no one has called you out for it. It lives in the cracks between your breath, humming under your ribs. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It just waits, patiently, for you to hear it. That's the silence that followed many of them after Friday's show. Not the thunder of applause, not the gasps that had filled the gym, but what came after. When the lights turned off, the doors opened, and the stage was empty. William had walked away, violin in hand, head held higher than any of them had ever seen. They had clapped, yes. Some had even stood. But deep down, there was a heaviness they couldn't shake. Not because of what William played, but because of what they realized they'd failed to see all along. A particular ache comes from realizing you've looked someone in the eye for months, maybe years, and never really seen them. That ache settled into the corners of the school like fog. It clung to their lockers, sat in their shoes, and slipped beneath the cracks of their conversations. Nobody joked about William anymore. But no one knew how to speak to him either. They weren't afraid of him. They were afraid of what they now saw in themselves. Talia, who had once rolled her eyes every time William tuned his violin near her desk, now stopped mid-sentence whenever she heard music. It felt different now. Less background. More sacred. And she couldn't explain the feeling in her chest, like shame wrapped in static, whenever she remembered the day she imitated his playing for laughs. She wanted to say something, but every time she got close, the words stuck. Not because they weren't true, but because she wasn't sure she deserved to speak them. Even Mr. Ben felt it, especially Mr. Ben. He had stood in front of classrooms for years, confident in reading kids like open books. But now, walking past William in the hallway felt like passing a closed door you used to barge through without knocking. And it wasn't just William. They now saw things differently. It was each other. The boy in the wheelchair, whom no one partnered with in PE, suddenly had people asking to be on his team. The girl with the heavy accent in history class found hands raised after her answers instead of smirks. It wasn't a miracle. It was a mirror. Because William's song hadn't just exposed talent, it had exposed the habit of underestimating the quiet, of misjudging softness, of mistaking humility for emptiness. And what stung the most wasn't that they had laughed. It was that they had done it casually. Some of them began to write notes, ones they never sent. Some sat beside William in class, not saying much, just being there. Some said nothing but carried the discomfort like a stone in their pocket, reminding them that dignity must be offered before it's earned. Because the truth is, when you hurt someone without meaning to, the ache is yours to carry, even after they've moved on. That ache doesn't punish. It teaches. It teaches that respect is not a reaction. It's a posture. One you choose even when you don't understand. It teaches that every quiet person has a storm inside them, and you do not get to decide when it should rain. Perhaps most importantly, it teaches this. When you treat someone as less, something in you becomes less too. But when you choose to see, listen, and honor, something in you rises. And if you're lucky, you learn that applause is loud, but regret is louder, because it plays in your heart long after the music ends. We often think silence means someone has nothing to say. But sometimes, silence is where the strongest truths are born. William didn't raise his voice. He raised his presence. And in doing so, he forced a room to confront the quiet cruelty of assumption. This wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning, a reminder that everyone carries a story we haven't read yet. That respect should never be given based on noise, but on being. Maybe the real lesson isn't just about how we treat others, but how often we fail to see them at all. So I'll leave you with this. Who have you overlooked lately? And what might you finally hear if you stopped to listen truly? If this story spoke to something in you, share your thoughts below and be sure to subscribe for interesting videos.